You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In the Harrow Bay Confessions, we follow a trusted narrator through 3 haunting, unsolved cases in a quiet coastal town. A missing teenager, a murdered couple at Lover's Lane, and a fisherman who vanished at sea. At first, it feels like a gripping true crime mystery, but as the stories unfold, unsettling patterns begin to emerge. The narrator knows too much, details never released, emotions too raw, and in the final chilling twist, they reveal the truth. They didn't just tell the stories, they lived them. They caused them. It's a confession hidden in plain sight, disguised as the very thing you came for, a mystery. If you love dark, slow-burn stories with jaw-dropping twists and killers who hide in plain sight, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because next time, the voice you trust might be hiding something far more sinister. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction inspired by true crime. It contains disturbing content. Hello and welcome. Today I want to take you on a journey to a small coastal town called Harrow Bay, a quaint, foggy harbour community that harbours some dark secrets. In this monologue, I'll be your guide through a series of eerie, unsolved cases that have plagued this otherwise peaceful town. These stories have been whispered about for years, shared around campfires and in coffee shops, each one stranger than the last. Now, on the surface, I may seem like just another storyteller or investigator, someone who has researched these local mysteries in depth. I have pored over old newspapers and case files, spoken with long-time residents, and even walked the very paths where these events unfolded. I appear to be a trusted narrator, someone who genuinely wants to get to the truth behind these chilling incidents. And I do, just maybe not in the way you'd expect. As I recount these cases, pay attention to the details. There's an old saying, the devil is in the details. In Harrow Bay, that might be more literal than you think. So get comfortable and listen closely. Our first story begins on a cool summer night down by the old lighthouse on Raven Point. It was late June, about 20 years ago. The sun had long set, leaving only a pale moon to silver the gentle waves around Raven Point Lighthouse. Emily Porter, a bright 17-year-old waitress at the harbour diner, was finishing up her late shift. She wiped down the counters, flipped the open sign to closed, and stepped out into the mild night air. Emily was well-liked, captain of her school's swim team, honours student, the kind of teenager who made her parents proud. That night she was expected home by midnight after work, but Emily never made it home. Emily's car was found the next morning still parked in the gravel lot behind the diner, one door flung wide open. Her keys were missing, and her cell phone lay on the driver's seat, screen cracked. At first glance, nothing else of hers seemed out of place, until a search party found her denim jacket caught on the rocks near the base of Raven Point Lighthouse, a 10-minute walk from the diner. The jacket was torn, as if it had snagged on something, and the right sleeve was soaked with seawater. A lone sneaker, which matched the ones Emily had been wearing at work, was discovered on the wet sand nearby. These were the only traces of her. When word spread that Emily was missing, the entire community sprang into action. Harrow Bay is the kind of town where everyone knows your face, if not your name, and a missing local girl was unheard of. Volunteers combed the beach with flashlights and bloodhounds, calling out Emily's name into the thick coastal fog. I remember those search parties well. I was there too, a concerned neighbour holding a lantern, walking those dunes alongside the others. We searched for days, hope turning into heartbreak as each new dawn broke without Emily. The police launched an investigation. They interviewed Emily's friends, family, and co-workers, exploring every possible angle. Was she having trouble at home, or secretly seeing someone? Could she have run away to start a new life? By all accounts, Emily was a happy teen with no plans to leave town. Her parents tearfully insisted she would never disappear on purpose. With each passing day, foul play looked more and more like the only explanation, and fear took root in Harrow Bay. Investigators dug into Emily's phone records. They found that shortly before she disappeared, she had exchanged several texts with an unknown number. The last message sent from her phone was at 11:47 p.m, and it simply read, "On my way." That was it. The number was a disposable phone, untraceable. Whoever Emily was planning to meet that night didn't want to be identified. This revelation led to rampant speculation. Perhaps Emily had a secret relationship, or someone had lured her out there under false pretenses. As days turned into weeks, the case grew colder. No body was found, despite extensive searches of the shoreline and even a dive team scouring the shallow waters around the point. Without a body or eyewitnesses, tangible evidence was scarce. Rumours filled the void left by facts. Some townsfolk whispered about the lighthouse ghost, an old legend of a keeper's spirit luring victims into the sea, though most dismissed that as nonsense, a way to rationalise a very human horror. Others suspected a drifter or tourist might have been responsible, someone who slipped into town and then vanished without a trace. Emily's parents eventually left Harrow Bay, unable to bear living in a place that held so many reminders of their lost daughter. The lighthouse at Raven Point became a silent monument to the tragedy, its beams sweeping the dark sea each night, as if still searching for her. Over the years, teenagers would occasionally drive out to the lighthouse and leave flowers or handwritten notes for Emily, turning the spot into an unofficial memorial. To this day, the disappearance of Emily Porter remains unsolved. It's a case that haunted Harrow Bay for a long time. Parents who once felt safe letting their kids roam the boardwalk after dark began enforcing curfews. The diner installed new security lights and cameras, and while life eventually moved on, a shadow of uncertainty lingered. How could a young girl vanish in a town so small, leaving behind only a scream on the wind, a torn jacket, and unanswered questions? At this point in our journey, you might feel a chill, as if the ocean breeze has snuck indoors. Unfortunately for Harrow Bay, Emily's story was only the beginning. Our next case takes us a few years after Emily's disappearance. By then, Harrow Bay had settled back into an uneasy normalcy. People tried to forget, to believe that whatever evil visited our town that night had come and gone. But in the summer of 2010, a horrifying discovery shattered that illusion. There's a secluded bluff just outside town known as Grey Fox Overlook, though local teens have a simpler name for it: Lover's Lane. It's the kind of spot kids go to for privacy, parking their cars beneath the pine trees, looking out at the moonlit ocean, sharing secrets and stolen beers. On an August night, not unlike the one when Emily vanished, 2 college students drove up to Grey Fox Overlook and never came back alive. Michael Reed, 20, and Ashley Dunn, 19, were high school sweethearts home for the summer. They had been out late at a bonfire on the beach with friends. Around 11 p.m, they left the gathering, and it's believed they headed to the Overlook for some alone time before their break ended. They parked Michael's old Chevy under the rustling branches, with a sweeping view of Harrow Bay's lights twinkling in the distance below. The night was warm and clear, aside from the rolling mist that always seems to creep in off the water past midnight. When Michael and Ashley didn't return home the next morning, their families grew concerned. By afternoon, their parents contacted the police. A couple of Michael's friends recalled the pair mentioning they might stop by Lover's Lane after the bonfire, so officers were dispatched to check Grey Fox Overlook. What they found up there would mark one of the grisliest scenes in Harrow Bay's history. Michael's Chevy was still parked in its spot facing the sea, engine cold, radio off. The passenger door was ajar. Ashley was found slumped in the passenger seat, her clothes spattered with dried blood. She had been stabbed multiple times. There were signs of a ferocious struggle. The car's interior was a mess of overturned soda cups and torn-up upholstery, and one of the windows was shattered. Michael was nowhere to be seen in the car. Following a trail of blood drops and disturbed dirt, officers found Michael's body about 20 yards from the vehicle, partially hidden in a scraggly thicket of bushes. He had been stabbed as well. and his injuries were fatal. It appeared he had tried to run, injured, maybe attempting to draw the attacker away from Ashley or simply to save himself, but he collapsed in those bushes and bled to death alone under the stars. The news of a double murder at Lovers Lane struck Harrow Bay like lightning. A sense of pure horror set in. Who could have done this? This time, unlike with Emily's disappearance, there was no doubt a murderous predator was stalking our community. 2 young lives had been brutally snuffed out. For the second time in just a few years, fear gripped the town. Police swarmed Grey Fox Overlook. They combed the area for evidence: tyre tracks, fingerprints, DNA, any clues to identify the killer. Crime scene techs noted that aside from Michael's car, no other vehicles seemed to have been parked there recently, at least none that left clear tracks on the hard-packed dirt. If the killer drove up, perhaps they parked farther down the road or arrived on foot. One curious detail: Ashley's purse and Michael's wallet were found inside the car, cash still in place. Robbery was clearly not the motive. Ashley's jewellery, a necklace and a charm bracelet, was missing though. Her family swore she was wearing both that night. Police wondered, had the killer taken trophies, or had those items been lost in the struggle? A thorough search of the scene didn't turn them up. Forensic teams collected what they could. They found unidentified fingerprints on the outside of the car's passenger door and a few on the broken window, perhaps smudges left by the assailant when pulling the door open or leaning in. There was also a partial shoe print in blood on the dirt near Michael's body, perhaps from the killer's boot as he stepped near his fallen victim. Unfortunately, it wasn't a clear print, and it matched no footwear in police databases at the time. DNA samples were taken from the blood and from skin found under Ashley's fingernails. She had clearly fought back, scratching her attacker. These samples provided a profile. The killer was male, but it matched no one in the national DNA databases. If the murderer was local, he had no criminal record. If he was an outsider, he hadn't been caught for anything else yet. Investigators pieced together a possible narrative. Michael and Ashley were in the car when someone approached. Perhaps they thought it was a friend sneaking up, or a police officer telling them to move along. The attacker surprised them, maybe as Ashley stayed in the car and Michael stepped out, or vice versa. The violence was sudden and frenzied. Michael likely fought back, got stabbed, then ran or was dragged out. Ashley, cornered in the car, tried to defend herself but couldn't overcome the attacker's knife. Both died within minutes. The killer then slipped away into the night, leaving scarcely a trace. The town went into panic. That summer, Grey Fox Overlook was deserted. No one dared go there anymore. Parents enforced even stricter curfews than after Emily's case, and young people found themselves under constant watch. Rumours spread like wildfire. Some thought it could be a drifter or a known troublemaker from a neighbouring town. Others suspected it had to be someone from Harrow Bay, someone who knew those kids or had a grudge. Whispers of a Lovers Lane maniac circulated in hushed conversations. Was it possible Emily's disappearance and this double murder were connected? They were different crimes. One a quiet disappearance, one a brutal stabbing, but the timing, a few years apart, made people wonder if a single predator was testing the waters and then escalating. Officially, police stated there was no evidence linking the two cases. Privately, some investigators weren't so sure. I remember reporting on the Lovers Lane murders for a local paper. I was a junior journalist back then, covering the crime beat. I spoke with Michael's and Ashley's grieving parents, attended the emotional candlelight vigil held in their memory on the high school football field. I can still recall the sea of faces lit by candlelight and tears, the principal saying words of remembrance, the silent fear in everyone's eyes. We all desperately wanted answers. The police set up a tip hotline. A reward fund was raised by the community for any information leading to an arrest. Tips did come in. A camper at a nearby campground reported an unfamiliar truck driving past late that night. A neighbour down the hill remembered hearing what sounded like a girl screaming, but by the time they went outside, only the chirp of crickets and crash of distant waves remained. Each lead was followed to a dead end. One person of interest emerged briefly, a young man named Todd Crane, who had gone to school with Michael and had a history of hot-headed fights. Rumours were that he had once had a crush on Ashley and was jealous of their relationship. Police questioned Todd extensively. He had cuts on his arm when brought in, which only fueled suspicions, but Todd claimed he'd gotten them working on his car's engine. His alibi for that night was shaky. He said he was home alone watching TV. However, DNA tests comparing his profile to the crime scene did not match. The fingerprints on the car door weren't his either. With nothing solid tying him to the murders, Todd was eventually released. The town's paranoia had fingered the wrong man, it seemed. With Todd ruled out and no new leads, the Lovers Lane case stalled. It seemed inconceivable that someone could commit such a heinous act and simply disappear. But that was exactly what happened. As months went by, the case grew cold. The evidence collected, those fingerprints, that DNA, sat in storage, waiting for a match that never came. The killer's knife was never found. The missing jewellery was never located. Michael and Ashley's families were left with only their grief and the torment of not knowing who or why. Harrow Bay changed after that. A darkness settled in. People locked their doors religiously, something many hadn't bothered with in the past. Sales of home security systems spiked. Grey Fox Overlook, once a lively hangout, became a desolate patch of land, eventually reclaimed by nature as grass and weeds grew over the tyre ruts. To this day, if you hike up there, you might find a weathered wooden cross at the site where the car was found, placed by Michael's father, a silent reminder of lives cut short. 2 cases, both unsolved, a missing girl and a murdered couple. By now, some of you might be wondering, is there a connection? If you lived in Harrow Bay back then, you certainly would have wondered. Some locals whispered that our town had a curse, or that a serial killer was living among us, biding time between horrific acts. Others insisted each crime was isolated, a tragic collision of unfortunate circumstances. The police publicly treated them as separate incidents, but I know at least one detective, now long retired, who confided in me that he believed these crimes could be the work of one man. At the time, he just couldn't prove it. Before we get to our next story, take a moment to breathe. The tales only get stranger from here, and the darkest revelation is yet to come. For a while after the Lovers Lane murders, Harrow Bay went mercifully quiet. Years passed. Kids who grew up under the shadow of those unsolved cases became adults, trying to put the horrors behind them. It seemed maybe, just maybe, whatever malevolence had stalked our little town had moved on or gone dormant. But evil has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Our third case took place not on a lonely road or by an old lighthouse, but out on the open water. Yet it would prove to be just as perplexing and terrifying. Captain Eric Johan was a seasoned fisherman, a rugged man in his 50s who had spent his entire life on the sea. Everyone in Harrow Bay knew Eric. Some called him Cap'n, or just Johan. He ran a small charter fishing outfit and owned a weather-beaten trawler named the Nightingale. Eric was the kind of man who could navigate the bay's tricky currents blindfolded. He'd go out in any weather, saying the sea was in his blood. In the fall of 2018, Cap'n Johan went out on a routine solo fishing trip and never returned. It was late October when it happened, just before Halloween. A nor'easter storm had brushed the coast that week, but by the 30th the skies cleared up. The water was still choppy with residual winds, but nothing a salty dog like Johan couldn't handle. He set out in the Nightingale one afternoon to check his crab pots and maybe haul in some striped bass, telling a dockhand he'd be back by morning with a boat full of catch. When the next morning came and went with no sign of him, folks started to worry. By midday, another fisherman spotted something drifting about 2 miles offshore, near Black Reef. It was the Nightingale, idle and bobbing in the waves, as if aimlessly wandering without its captain. A Coast Guard boat was dispatched, and they intercepted the drifting trawler. What they found was unsettling. The Nightingale was empty. Eric Johan was nowhere on board. The engine was still puttering in neutral. The fuel hadn't run out yet. There was a half-filled bucket of crabs on the deck and a fresh mug of coffee in the wheelhouse, its contents cold. It was as if Johan had simply vanished into thin air while going about his work. But people don't just disappear at sea without reason. On deck, they found signs of a struggle. One of the railings on the side was bent, as if something heavy had hit it or someone had tried to brace against it forcefully. A few droplets of blood were smeared on the rail and deck, though not enough to suggest a grievous wound on their own. The most baffling detail was a tangled coil of rope near the stern. It looked like it had been cut, one end stained with blood. To the Coast Guard crew, it appeared possible that Johann had been tied with that rope at some point, perhaps bound, and then managed to cut himself free. But if so, where was he now? The search for Captain Johann commenced at once. Boats, helicopters, and diving teams scoured the vicinity of Black Reef and beyond. The water was cold and unforgiving, but they held out hope that if he'd fallen overboard, his years at sea might have given him the fortitude to survive until rescue. Tragically, after 2 days, hope dwindled. On the third day, Eric Johann's body washed ashore about 5 miles down the coast, near a rocky inlet. He was deceased, his lifeless eyes still open, staring at the grey sky. The autopsy results deepened the mystery. Johann's lungs had water, confirming he drowned. But he also had a significant head injury, blunt force trauma on the back of his skull, and deep bruising around his wrists and ankles, consistent with being bound by ropes. It looked like someone had attacked him on his boat, tied him up, and possibly even knocked him unconscious. But why? Piracy seemed unlikely. The Nightingale wasn't valuable enough to steal, and nothing obvious was missing from the vessel. Johann's wallet and personal effects were found intact in the cabin. If it was murder, what was the motive? Who would want an old fisherman like him dead in such a dramatic fashion? Investigators considered a few possibilities. Perhaps Johann stumbled upon something illegal out at sea, like drug smugglers or poachers, and they silenced him. Or maybe he had a bitter falling out with a deckhand or fellow fisherman that turned deadly. There were whispers about Eric having a heated argument at the docks a week prior with a younger fisherman over fishing territory, but that man had an alibi. He was in another state at a wedding when Johann disappeared. Another theory was that maybe Johann had hired an assistant for the day who betrayed him, yet anyone who knew Eric knew he preferred to work alone on his solo outings. The crime scene, if one could call the boat a crime scene, yielded frustratingly little. The salt water had washed away most trace evidence. The blood on the rope and deck was Johann's own. No fingerprints or DNA other than Johann's could be recovered. Whoever did this had the advantage of the wide-open ocean to conceal their getaway. If a second boat was involved, it may have stayed far enough away to not be noticed by others, especially under cover of night. In a town like ours, it was an unprecedented crime, essentially a murder on the high seas, just off our familiar shores. The locals were deeply unsettled. A beloved fisherman killed in such a mysterious way stirred old fears anew. It had been 8 years since the Lovers' Lane murders, and now here we were again, facing questions with no answers. Candlelight vigils were held for Captain Johann, and his funeral was one of the largest gatherings in Harrow Bay that year. People shared stories of how Eric taught their kids to fish, or how he'd give out free crabs to the church on Sundays. The idea that someone would target him was unthinkable. Yet an ugly possibility hung in the air. Could it be the same monster who took Emily and slaughtered Michael and Ashley had now returned after years of silence to claim another life? It seemed far-fetched. Those crimes were so different in nature and so far apart in time. A teenage girl, a young couple, and now an older fisherman. The MOs didn't line up neatly at all. No wonder law enforcement refused to officially link any of them. But some of us in town, those who'd been around long enough to remember each incident, couldn't help but notice a thread. All these events happened here, in our little slice of the world, to good people with no obvious enemies, and all of them remained unsolved. I spoke to that same retired detective after Johann's death. Let's call him Detective Harris. His hair had gone grey since I first met him during the Lovers' Lane investigation, and retirement had not dulled his mind. Over black coffee at the local cafe, Harris confided in me that he had long suspected a single individual was behind at least the first 2 cases, and possibly Johann's as well. "It's just a hunch," he admitted. "Call it my white whale. I could never prove a damn thing. But something about the eyes of the people I interviewed back then. Sometimes I wonder if I talked to the devil and didn't know it." When I pressed him on what he meant, Harris just shook his head. He mentioned little things that never left him. a volunteer who searched for Emily, who asked peculiar questions about how the crime might have been done. A young reporter covering the Lovers Lane murders who seemed to know details that hadn't been released. Someone who lingered at Johan's dock the night he left, caught in the background of a CCTV camera, but whose face was just out of frame. None of it was actionable evidence, just gut feelings and fragments. I could be wrong, he sighed. God help me if I was right. I remember finishing my coffee, heart pounding, realizing that Harris was truly afraid, that even after all these years, a part of him was haunted by the idea that the killer was right under our noses, masquerading as one of us. 3 cases, 3 tragedies, no answers. By this point, you must be wondering what kind of person could be responsible for all of this. How could someone go from abducting a teenage girl to butchering a couple to staging a sea captain's death with no clear connection between victims, no obvious pattern? How could they live among their neighbours, smiling each day, while hiding such a dark secret? Well, the truth is about to come out. You've followed me through each step of these harrowing stories, listened as I recounted the sorrow of Emily's parents, the terror that struck Michael and Ashley, the enigma of Captain Johan's fate. Throughout, I've spoken as someone on the outside looking in, a dutiful narrator piecing together evidence and theories. Perhaps you've started to feel that something was off about these accounts, that there were moments where I seemed to know too much or care a little too deeply. If so, trust that instinct, because there's one last story to tell, and it's mine. For years, I've been regarded as a reliable storyteller, an investigator at heart who has a passion for the truth. People have trusted me with their stories, their memories, their pain. I built that trust carefully. It's part of what makes me so good at what I do. And what I do, as you may have realized by now, is far more than just telling stories. The reason I know so much about these cases is because I'm the one who committed them. Yes, I am the person you've been looking for. I took Emily's life on that foggy June night. I crept up to her as she walked toward Raven Point, her ponytail swinging with each confident step, and I called her name softly from the shadows. She recognized me. Why wouldn't she? I was just another friendly face from town. She smiled, likely thinking I was there to meet her as a friend, or perhaps that I needed help. I remember the trust in her eyes turning to shock as I grabbed her. She barely had time to scream, just one short cry that got lost in the ocean wind before I overpowered her. The struggle was quick. She was so much smaller. The moonlight was the only witness. I left her body wedged in a narrow sea cave at the base of the cliff. By the time the currents eventually freed her and carried her out to sea weeks later, no one in Harrow Bay knew to look so far from where she vanished. Even when parts of her did wash up on a distant shore, they didn't tie it to her. Those remains were never identified. They still think she simply disappeared. I kept a souvenir from Emily, a little silver locket that hung around her neck. Inside was a tiny photo of her family. I sometimes pop it open to see their smiling faces, frozen in time, utterly unaware of what became of their daughter. That locket is one of my prized possessions. I hid it in plain sight, actually. If you ever visited the Harrow Bay Historical Museum, you might have seen it in the display of lost and found objects from town history. It amuses me that I placed it there years after her death, labelling it as an unclaimed locket found on the beach. People have looked right at it, never knowing it was taken off Emily's cold neck by her killer. Do you feel that chill running down your spine? We're just getting started. When I killed Michael and Ashley at Lovers Lane, it was like a rush of adrenaline unlike any I'd felt before. By then, a few years had passed since Emily. I was older, and I'd often think back to that night by the lighthouse, the feeling of power it gave me, and the secrecy that followed. I wondered if I could do it again, or if Emily was just a once-in-a-lifetime thrill. Part of me thought maybe I was done with that dark impulse. Part of me knew better. So on that August night in 2010, I decided to play the boogeyman once more. I watched Michael and Ashley at the bonfire from afar. I knew them both casually. Small-town life, you cross paths with everyone. I saw when they left, and I followed them up to Grey Fox Overlook, driving with my headlights off, creeping behind at a distance on that winding road. They never noticed me. When they parked at the overlook, I parked down the hill, hidden among some trees, and approached on foot. The element of surprise was mine. I had a knife at the ready and a mask over my face, just a simple black ski mask, nothing fancy, but enough to hide my identity. Their laughter was the first thing I heard. They were so happy, so oblivious. I almost felt a pang of envy. Then I reminded myself that I could snuff out that happiness in an instant, and I did. I smashed the butt of my knife into Michael's window, shattering the glass in a sudden, violent crash. Their screams were everything I'd hoped for. Michael tried to fight. He was a bigger guy than me, strong from college football, but rage and preparation are great equalizers. I stabbed and swung wildly. He lunged at me and got slashed, then stumbled out of the car. Ashley was trapped by her seatbelt, shrieking, clawing. She managed to scratch my arm pretty good. I remember the flare of pain, the warm blood trickling down, which only fueled my anger. I silenced her with several quick thrusts. The look in her eyes, it was like watching a candle flame flicker and die. Michael had managed to get out, and in his desperation he ran. I caught up to him as he was faltering near those bushes. He was bleeding badly, panting, pleading with me. Why? Why are you doing this? I recall smiling under my mask, savouring the fear in his voice. Then I finished him, plunging the knife deep as the distant sound of waves crashed below. In the aftermath, the night was eerily quiet. Only my heavy breathing and the chirp of those crickets kept me company as I stood there, looking at what I'd done. I took Ashley's necklace and bracelet after it was over, gently unclasping them from her still warm body. Keepsakes. They were stained with a bit of her blood, but I cleaned them up later. I still have them, tucked away in a little velvet pouch alongside Emily's locket. Michael's class ring is there too. I pried it off his finger, a little bonus. No one even noticed it was missing, because his parents buried him with a replica his brother provided, thinking he'd lost it at the scene. After the Lovers' Lane murders, I played my role flawlessly. As I mentioned, I was a junior journalist then, eager to cover the big crime story. I wrote about the community's grief while secretly relishing the chaos I'd sown. I interviewed classmates of the victims, standing right next to them in their pain, a wolf in sheep's clothing. I attended that vigil with a solemn face, even as my heart pounded with excitement. Do you realize how intoxicating it is to be praised for helping memorialize people you killed with your own hands? I do. By the time they brought in poor Todd Crane as a suspect, I'll admit I was nervous. Nervous I might actually get away with it entirely by letting someone else take the fall. But the evidence didn't line up with him, and soon enough he was off the hook. I never worried about the DNA or fingerprints. I wasn't in any system, and I knew how to avoid leaving clear prints. I wore gloves that night, except during the actual struggle when things got messy, but the surfaces I touched were few, and I wiped them down. Those partial prints they found were useless. Years passed. Harris, that detective, he always eyed me a bit funny when we'd cross paths. I think he sensed something, but he could never prove it, as he said. When he retired, I felt a wave of relief mixed with disappointment. Half of me wanted him to catch me, half of me revelled in outsmarting him. Then we come to dear Captain Johan. Why target him, you wonder? The others were young, and he was older, a respected man. To be honest, by 2018 I thought maybe I was done with killing. I had a career, friends, well, acquaintances. I've always been a loner at heart. But darkness doesn't just disappear. It's like an undertow beneath calm waves, waiting to drag you down. One evening I was at the docks, chatting casually with Johan as he prepped the Nightingale. He mentioned heading out alone that night, boasting he'd bring back a record haul. I smiled and wished him luck. And then, on a whim, I decided I would be his record haul. I waited until he was well out to sea, then launched my own little skiff that I often use for photography excursions along the coast. I followed him, staying a distance back, lights out. Night had fallen, the sea was mostly quiet, save for the splash of waves against my hull. I knew Johan often anchored near Black Reef to check his traps. He wasn't going far offshore. Sure enough, I found the Nightingale bobbing gently in the moonlight. I tied my skiff to the back of his boat, ever so quietly, and climbed aboard. Poor Eric never saw it coming. He was at the bow, leaning over to haul up a cage, grunting with effort. The ocean's sounds masked my approach. I had brought a steel pipe from my boat, and with one swing I cracked it against the back of his head. He crumpled, conscious but dazed, blood matting his grey hair. I quickly bound his wrists and ankles with rope, the same rope he'd coiled on deck for his catch. He came to and started shouting, confused, angry. We were miles from shore. No one could hear him, no matter how loud he screamed. The fear in his eyes when I loomed over him with that pipe, I tell you, it was exquisite. Here was a man who had weathered storms, who faced death on the sea regularly, and yet in that moment he knew he was utterly helpless. I toyed with him for a bit, asking if he remembered Emily, Michael, Ashley. He was baffled, likely thinking I was insane. But I just wanted to speak those names to him, to let the echo of their memory be the last thing he heard, even if he couldn't understand why. Then I tipped him overboard, bound as he was. He hit the water with a splash and immediately began to sink, thrashing, trying desperately to stay afloat. The weights I'd tied to that rope did their job. I watched him vanish under the dark waves. Bubbles rose, then nothing. I wasn't quite done. I knew leaving the boat running would set a scene to perplex everyone, and I wanted that drama. I cut the rope that had bound him, an unnecessary flourish perhaps, but I enjoyed the thought of detectives puzzling over it. Then I slipped back to my skiff and disappeared into the night, leaving the Nightingale adrift just as the first light of dawn crept in. They eventually found Eric's body, just as I'd hoped, and the town was thrown into turmoil again. I attended his funeral, naturally. I shook my head with the rest, murmuring how awful it was. I even helped organize a charity fishing tournament in his honor the next year. Closure for everyone except the truth. You might ask, why am I telling you all this now? Why would I confess after all these years when I've clearly gotten away with it? Maybe I'm tired of hiding. Maybe I crave the infamy. Or maybe I trust that you won't believe a word of it. After all, this is presented as a story, isn't it? I'm just a narrator weaving a chilling tale for entertainment. If I suddenly slip in that I'm the killer, well, that's quite the twist for a true crime video. You, dear listener, might be in shock, wondering if this is a sick joke or a morbid storytelling device. You might even be frantically checking the comments or description for some indication that this is fiction. I assure you it's not. This is my confession, delivered right to you. And it's as real as the weight of the knife I still keep in my desk drawer, the one that took lives on a warm August night. It's as real as the faded scar on my forearm from Ashley's desperate nails. I've relived these moments in my head for so long, and I wanted to share them with you, to let you in on the secret that I've carried alone. Consider it my final masterpiece of storytelling, the truth cloaked in a format you were primed to trust. Now you know. You've seen through the eyes of a killer and heard the truth behind those unsolved mysteries of Harrow Bay. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you go to the police? Will anyone even believe you if you do? Perhaps you'll just tell yourself this was all a spooky yarn, a work of fiction to send a chill down your spine before bed. You might even try to forget you ever heard my voice, dismissing it as a twisted fantasy. But some part of you will remember. Next time you stroll a lonely beach at night or drive by a quiet overlook, you'll recall the friendly narrator who turned out to be a murderer. And you'll wonder, could it be true? Could a killer really hide in plain sight like that? Take a good look around at the people in your life. The helpful neighbor, the chatty co-worker, the content creator who seems so likable. Are you sure you know who they really are? As for me, I think my time in Harrow Bay has come to an end. I have other places to go, new stories to spin and secrets to bury. Maybe I'll settle in another little town much like this one, a place that feels safe. Until it's not. Thank you for listening to my stories. Sweet dreams. You came here for a mystery and got a front row seat to a confession. The stories I told weren't pulled from headlines, they were taken from my own memories. And now that you know the truth, the question isn't what happens next, it's who's next. Some storytellers don't just describe the darkness, they live in it.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week. So if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.